So hopefully everyone can see my screen. And also with me, I have David Lin, who's the Vice President of Business Development, and Ophelia from our marketing department, and Frank from our sales. So please go ahead and ask any questions. So the agenda right now is that I'm going to go through about 10 to 15 minutes of slides to talk about Vocareum, give an introduction. This is for people who might not be familiar with Vocareum at all. And then we will dive into a demo for David will provide a demo for 30 minutes for the topic that we have today, which is focusing on our cloud lab. And then we will go ahead and open it up for any question. So let me just make sure that I can hear the chat. Okay, so I just want to make sure everything is going okay. So in the middle, if you have any questions, it'd be great if you can use the Q&A functionality to ask questions. This way we'll have a record of the questions and everything and the answers that we provided that we can follow up later on and make sure if we need to make any changes. So first of all, what do we mean by virtual labs? Essentially, what we mean is that as an administrator, as a teacher, you can specify what data you want to deliver to the users, what compute you want to deliver to the users, and also what guardrails do you want to provide for this environment. So when we say compute, so we can deliver compute to various different virtualizations, as well as what we'll hear about today is actually some cloud credentials. And then we can deliver data through various different forms. In terms of guardrails, there are, depending on the kind of compute you're providing, there are lots of different guardrails around time or dollars, budgets, monthly time, and things like that to make sure that the costs are under control. And then Vocareums make sure that once the learner comes in, that we'll provision the resources, we'll scale it, we'll terminate it as needed. We'll make sure that the data is persistent, so the user comes back between sessions. So in order to save cost, while we might go and shut down the compute, but we'll make sure the data is there. And then we manage all the roles. And so there's several roles that you can create, and you can even create your custom roles on how you manage these labs. And then we provide different ways for authentication. So you can provide identity through either Vocareum's identity service, through SAML, through LTI, and through API, and everything else. So hopefully that gives you a sense of when we say a lab, what do we mean by that? So what's unique about Vocareum, that we are the broadest category of labs that we provide out there. So while you might find someone who provides maybe a VDI or maybe a programming lab, but we will provide all of the above. So, and they all provided a different virtualization. So we'll provide either managed Jupyter notebook, for example, or Docker containers, or virtual machines, or cloud, or a network of maybe virtual machines, a network of containers, and even cloud credential that we'll talk about today. These things are designed to be integrated tightly with different learning experiences. So we do not believe that labs kind of stand on their own, but they need to be integrated with different learning experience. By learning experience, we mean it could be things like videos, could be different assessment, and we have lots of capability and integration option, and hopefully it will become clear through the demo. These labs can be run either on our multi-tenant environment, or they can be run in the completely a single tenant environment. And the single tenant is essentially completely isolated network. So you might need it for compliance purposes. For example, you are bringing maybe a commercial license server, or maybe there's a data which you need to make sure that has a next level of security around it. And these labs come with a rich assessment suite. So our origins was in the university, although we have lots of now different learning modalities where we are serving these labs. We started with sort of a university environment, so there was a lot. So our customer engagement has allowed us to develop a really rich suite of assessment capabilities, and then flexible deployment models. So we can, once again, not only you can deploy a different virtualization, but even the applications, either we will manage it, or you can bring your own applications through either a Docker image or a virtual machine image. So here are some examples of what we mean by these labs. So for example, data science labs, these are typically delivered as say a Docker container. We pre-install Jupyter notebooks in our studio, and where you can deliver data. Or often if you're using these labs for programming, then we will provide lots of different standard IDs, including Eclipse and Spider and Visual Code and IntelliJ for learning. If you're just teaching programming, we have a Windows desktop solution where we deliver VDI using DCV from Amazon. We have big data solution, and the way it is different is that, let's say if you are launching a Spark cluster, then we will, and if you're submitting a job there, then we'll manage scaling up the servers, running the job, shutting them down, and delivering the data. So whilst machine learning is another popular sort of topic which is learned on Vocareum. Now, when we say machine learning framework, so these we can deliver again either through virtual machines or through cloud credentials. Typically, it's used to maybe provision a GPU and run one of those machine learning frameworks like ML framework like PyTorch, etc. Cybersecurity is becoming a big sort of use case for us right now, where we are delivering a custom cyber range for the learners. So these will be basically a personal network of say Unix or Windows machine with lots of different sort of cybersecurity related tools installed. So at any given point for Vocareum, about 1 million learners are enrolled in a class, and around half of them actually are for learning cloud computing using AWS. So that's a very, very popular sort of lab for us. I would say the next one would be probably data science labs, and maybe then cybersecurity and Azure. Azure is relatively new. We launched this Azure support about a year or so ago. Databases, so we natively support like MySQL, Postgres, Neo4j, and DynamoDB. And there is again, this is sort of this is a fairly popular subject on Vocareum, where the learners are learning how to use a database or even administer a database. Robotics, so it's not, there's only one class which is run by Columbia on a MOOC, but we have thousands of learners who have gone in and learned robotics using ROS. We deliver Kubernetes cluster. This is becoming more and more popular, where the learners will come in and learn how to deploy a Kubernetes cluster. So for that, we'll deliver maybe a network of three virtual machines, maybe 2 worker nodes and 1 scheduler node. Full stack. Especially in the corporate environment, a lot of our labs are being developed for the learners to learn the latest and greatest about full stack. So these labs, this is delivered typically as a Docker container with lots of different databases and CI/CD tools like Jenkins and Git and all that. They're all is pre-installed. You can learn how to deploy Docker itself. And game engine, this is more aspirational. So we are there. We do have we do have an environment with Unity and Unreal Engine, maybe on GPU or without GPU. Development environments available. It's not deployed in production right now. So as I was mentioning, one of the big things is that over time, the labs have evolved to be used in lots of different contexts. So hands-on labs, MOOCs, for example, we have a lot of classes on edX especially, and then on and a few on Coursera, where the learners are coming in, and there are hundreds of thousands of learners learning, using it for Python or cybersecurity or robotics, as I was saying earlier on. Skill-based exams, especially last year, as most of the exams moved virtual. It's definitely a big use case for us now, is how do you learners come in, so you can deliver them maybe a Jupyter notebook, and we have lots of features built around delivering performance-based exams. We have some performance-based certification in sort of solutions also running from the corporate world. Training boot camps, hackathons, essentially these could be a case where a lab is provisioned for a few hours to a few days. So we have quite a few use cases there. Research is once again more aspirational, but we have built in a capability to be able to do very large process very large data sets, have all the security there, and then being able to manage big batch jobs, as I was mentioning earlier on. So for syndication, this is the use case where maybe one sort of one organization, one party is actually designing all the course materials and labs, and then we have infrastructure to enable you how you distribute it broadly. Virtual campus lab. So this is a kind of a straight up replacement for your campus labs. So so in terms of the underlying technology, as I was mentioning, there are a few virtualization levels. One of the big thing is some applications we just manage it, like programming or Jupyter and RStudio and full stack, and then we will deliver cloud labs, and this is what the topic of the demo would be today. So I will sort of skip it. Custom network of containers, so you can bring in your own Docker images and we can deliver a network of it. So this can be used, for example, if you for things like maybe you are teaching like a cloud analytics tool or whatever, when you need to have web server, have separate web server, and maybe separate machine which is running your analytics. Customer network of virtual machines. I think the big use cases I already mentioned, that was for things like cybersecurity or Kubernetes. And more and more focus we are putting in on managed batch scheduler. So if you need to run a large batch job on, let's say, an EMR cluster or for machine learning training, so we have the infrastructure to support it. So we are integrated with lots of different learning platforms. So here are some of our partners: Coursera, edX, Emeritus, Great Learning, Simplilearn, Udemy, and Udacity. We are in use like in 1,000+ universities worldwide. A lot of them where we have a direct relationship, but some of them through our partners. And one of the big takeaway from from this slide is that we do not have one sort of way for you to teach or learn coding, for example, or anything else. So we like to think that no one environment fits all. So that's why we'll provide a very wide range of even you can always install your own, but even in built-in solutions that we provide lots of different sort of IDs, for example, so IntelliJ, VS Code, Cloud9, Jupyter, RStudio, Athena, and hopefully you'll get a little bit of sense of it in the demo. Assessment. So this is obviously a large topic, and we will not be able to touch on it today, but we do have a large suite of assessment capabilities, which is auto grading, manual grading. We have some built-in plagiarism detection. You can provide inline comment to the learners. Peer review is surprisingly pretty broadly used, where you can create some a process by which peers can see each other's code and run it and review it, and you can either use it for grading scoring purposes or not. Leaderboard is a gamification. It's not used that much, but once it is used, is very, very effective, where the learners, when they submit their work, they're anonymously placed on a leaderboard based on the criterion that you define and implement. And then we can the latest assessment we implemented was multiple choice. So side by side to the lab, you can deliver a multiple choice assessment. Exams, and I think I will not go into it, but we are just to the details, but a lot of features sort of built specifically around supporting exams. So timed exams, passcode protected. So lots of sort of how do you manage the integrity of the exam. A lot of our labs are delivered through learning management. So typically a customer might come through a Canvas or a Blackboard or an edX. So there's integration. Sometimes, like for example, there is always a LTI level integration available. So LTI 1.1, but also LTI 1.3, which we launched about a year or so ago. In some cases like Canvas, there is more deeper integration around, say, speed grader and all that. So as I was saying earlier on, one takeaway here is that our labs are meant to be integrated in different sort of environments, right? So we have invested a lot of energy, make sure all sorts of integrations options are available. Cloud computing, I will not go into it because David, I know, is going to go into more detail. And this is something, as I was mentioning, that we have invested for the last year. This year, one of the big projects were the single tenant data centers to make sure that we can provide you all the sort of network level isolation for your infrastructure if you need it for either compliance or security reasons. REST API. So continuing the integration theme, there is a rich set of REST API available. It is used, for example, for a couple of cases. Maybe you have your own UI. Let's say if you're a learning company and if you have your own front end, you can bring the labs and you can embed it very seamlessly using our REST API. Or maybe you want to integrate Vocareum in your sort of a CI/CD process. So very often customers will manage their content in, let's say, Git, which they're managing themselves, and use our REST API to update the Vocareum content. So that was my part of the presentation. Obviously, I'm around here to answer any questions. And what I would like to do at this point, hand it off to David. And again, please use Q&A feature of if you want to ask any questions, that'd be great.
Hi guys, so as Sanjay mentioned, I'm David Lin with Vocareum, here to provide a survey of a few of the cloud infrastructure labs that Vocareum offers. These are essentially hands-on skill training environments, which can start either as an empty sandbox or come preloaded with some content, and everything is protected, as Sanjay was mentioning, by policies and budgets. In previous demos, we actually have shown the integration of Vocareum labs into learning management systems, LMSs, via LTI through like Canvas or edX or Brightspace D2L. So today we're just going to focus on demonstrating these labs in a standalone environment, the Vocareum environment. Okay, so what we have here on the left on this first tab here is a learner experience inside Vocareum. And in this other tab here is the instructor's experience, which will help set up the environment for the learner. First, we'll go over the learner experience, and then after that, we'll cover how these labs can be configured for your courses. So as a student, I've got a course called Vocareum Demo. I've got a set of labs or assignments on the left-hand side here, and I can go and enter into a lab. This one is an AWS sandbox. So this is, as Sanjay was mentioning, we're demoing cloud infrastructure. So right now, this is a very, very simple lab in which we've got some instructional material here. We've got a budget of $10. We've spent $0. Once I start the lab, it will issue an AWS account to me. It'll also prepare a temporary credential, and also has CLI that can be used if you need to access the AWS through APIs or through programmatic access or through the CLI, and then once the lab is up and running, then you can click the AWS button here, and it will launch a new tab straight into an AWS console. And so, as I mentioned, we're coming in with a temporary federated credential. Every student will get their own AWS account, fully managed by Vocareum, and gated and guardrailed by policies. So for this lab, for example, I might be able to run and launch EC2 instances, but I may not be allowed to launch SageMaker, for example. It all kind of depends on, and so right now I don't have anything in here. This is an empty environment, right? So I can also, as an instructor, preload content into this environment, pre-launch resources. And so pretty flexible there. And so the student now has a full sort of native AWS environment to do their work or to experiment, right? And when I'm done with this lab, I can sign out. So when I enter a different lab, I won't have a conflict there. And I can also end this lab. And so when I end this lab, there could be two different behaviors set up by the instructor. One is just determining all the resources inside that lab. Otherwise, it could be to stop the EC2 instances, for example, such that it's not incurring cost until the next session. Okay, and this session was set up to last for 5 hours, let's say. Okay, and what I'd like to show next is a different lab, which will actually evaluate, and the goal is to evaluate in the AWS environment. And this is actually a graded lab. And another difference between this lab and the previous one is that we are actually embedding the AWS console in an iframe. Okay, and so we've got a browser launched on the left-hand side here. Give it a second. And so this will bring us into an AWS console. And on the right-hand side, we actually have some instructional material. And actually, this is not instruction. These are questions that a student will need to answer to complete their assignment. Okay, and so this environment actually has pre-launched resources. And so the question here is, what is the instance type of the EC2 instance web server 1? And so the learner would then go in and go to the EC2 EC2 console here and take a look at the running instances. We've got one running instance here, and then do some inspection of the instance, figure out what kind of instance type it is. Okay, T2 micro. So T2 micro is set here. What kind of operating system is set up here, and we can go and scroll and see it's a Linux Unix environment. And we can go and inspect, what outbound ports are available for the EC2 instance and so on. And so, so this environment itself is allowing learners to do an evaluation of an AWS environment. Okay, so this is a read-only environment. Instructors have pre-launched resources into this environment, and now the student will go inspect and answer these questions. And so when I'm done, I could do a submission. And after the submission is complete, it sends my my submission into our grading server, and then it gets evaluated. And so we've got the first two answers completed and correct, and the next two are unanswered and didn't get any scores for that one. Okay, and so this is kind of an environment that you can use to give the students some hands-on experience in terms of looking at an AWS environment in a very, very safe manner, and of course, side by side here. Similar with this AWS environment, we can do that with Azure as well. And so very, very similar experience. We're evaluating cloud environment, and this is evaluating this Azure environment. Okay, and what we would do here, in this environment actually is set up. It's not as read-only, but you can also do some work if you needed to. If you wanted to set up, some virtual machines or Kubernetes cluster, you can do so through this environment, right? And so that's all basically a configuration by the instructor. And again, very, very clean sort of, side-by-side look. If you wanted to, we can also launch Azure into a new tab, and then you would have to enter in your credentials to get access to it. So with AWS, we can do a SSO straight into an AWS console in a new tab. With Azure, unfortunately, we can launch the Azure portal. Then you would have to enter in the user password. Or you can use this browser, and then we could pre-launch you into the environment. And so again, here, this is my temporary user. And again, every learner will get a separate AWS or Azure account per lab. Okay, and so in this case, this course I've got 6 labs, and 4 of them or 5 of them are AWS, and so I'll actually have 5 AWS accounts, and I'll have 1 Azure account. Okay, this next lab is a challenge lab, and so the difference between this lab and the other 2 above, this lab you're actually expected to do some work, right? And so in this exercise, you're supposed to set up a static static website on AWS using the AWS console or through the CLI. Okay, and we're going to start this lab so we can get an AWS credential. Okay, so now we're fetching an AWS credential, and so when we click the AWS button, again, we can get an AWS console. At the same time, the credential has been planted inside this terminal here. Okay, and so if I wanted to, I can do AWS EC2, describe instances, for example, right? And I can do, the work through CLI if I need to, or I can go straight to the management console. Okay, and again, when you're done, we can do a submission, and we haven't done anything yet, so hopefully we're not going to get full scores here. But when the submission happens, what'll our system will actually go and inspect the AWS environment and look for completion of the various tasks, and you'll see, okay, I did not create an S3 bucket. I do not have an S3 bucket website created there. So obviously I got 0 points here. But what we'll do in the next portion is to kind of go through the teacher environment and show you what we've actually done to evaluate a learner environment. Okay, so we'll leave this lab. And here's another example of actually using an AWS credential together with a programming lab. Okay, and here what we've got is a Jupyter Notebook environment that's been launched. As Sanjay was mentioning before, we can support all manner of development environments. Jupyter Notebook being one, RStudio, Eclipse Thea, IntelliJ, lots of different environments, and we can pair it again with an AWS account. Okay, and so basically when I do start lab here, now I'm picking up a new credential for a new account. Okay, and once I've got that, then I can run this Jupyter Notebook, and you'll see here in this Jupyter Notebook as I run through this. This command here in import Boto3 is using the AWS SDK. Okay, and I'm also going to use the comprehend service. Okay, and I'm using that to evaluate a sample tweet. It's always a great day when I can randomly put equestrian knowledge to good use at work. Okay, and so this is actually taking this tweet, sending it into comprehend to detect these key phrases, and then detecting the sentiment. Okay, and saying that figure out what the how, or try to understand what these phrases mean. Okay, and the goal here is actually to detect a sentiment. This is just detecting phrases. I'm sorry. Okay, and so the assignment's goal is to detect sentiment. I don't put anything in here for now. When I do a submission, again, this notebook is submitted to our grading service. Grading service will evaluate it. It'll run this notebook essentially and compare it against an auto-graded cell to see whether or not I've done the work properly. And it just takes a minute. It gets queued up inside our servers. And I did not, I got zeros. So what I'll do is uncomment this. Okay, run it again. And now hopefully it will detect the sentiment properly. I'm going to do another submission. And at this point, I got 10 out of 10, which basically means I accomplished the task for this task properly. Okay, and now we'll go back and take a look at this last lab. And this last lab is interesting because we actually, about a year and a half ago, we worked with AWS to support a hackathon with regards to COVID. And so this lab, they actually, AWS sponsored with I think like $100,000 of AWS credits, and multiple teams gained access to an AWS sandbox hosted by Vocareum with certain policy limits. And so this lab is starting. And what this lab will do is actually will preload the user's AWS account with a COVID-19 data lake. Okay, and so it'll just take a minute or two. And so once this is up, we'll be able to enter into the AWS console and take a look at the data lake. Let me just make sure this exit out of this one. This is the old AWS console from one of the previous labs. Okay, so this lab is ready. So when we click, we'll go to the new AWS console, and we can see that that we have some data that has been preloaded into this environment. So let's see. Data sources. And so this is the COVID-19 data sets that you can use as part of your assignment or your practice area. Okay, and so this is in Athena, and you can pull it into QuickSight or pull into other sort of visualization tools, or integrate it with an application, depending on what you want to do as part of this hackathon. Okay, and so at this point, I wanted to switch over to the teacher experience on setting up the different labs. Okay, so I'm over into the teacher workspace, and you'll see on the left-hand side, again, we've got a set of labs pre-configured. We also have some labs inside this old folder. Okay, and so we can kind of group these and kind of define the labs that are kind of under development or to be deployed to the students. Okay, so this first one was the AWS sandbox, which is kind of an empty space with some policy and different constraints. Okay, and so within each of these labs, there's one or more parts, and there's only one part. Okay, inside this part, we are calling it a AWS Cloud Lab, and we are setting a session length of 300 minutes, 5 hours. And in this lab, we are stopping resources at the end of the lab. Okay, if we wanted to, we can also terminate the resources. Okay, so stop resource, if you recall, is basically stopping the EC2 instance so it doesn't keep incurring cost until the student comes back again, right? And then we also have a total time budget. So we're saying that, each session could be about 5 hours, but we're giving them total of 10 hours accumulated over time to spend inside this lab. And we also have a cost budget, which basically means, okay, we are keeping you to $100 of spend inside this lab. Okay, if as soon as you exceed the budget, then we will shut down the lab and terminate all your resources. Okay, and so we have different controls as well. We can say set a monthly budget, for example. We can say, okay, each month you can spend, up to $50 or $10, right? And in that case, we're managing to both a total budget, which is $100, as well as a monthly budget. Okay, so we can kind of stretch that the resources out a little more over the course of a semester or over the course of some time. We chose a simple Vocareum Elite IDE, and then we also have some interfaces that we can provide to that learner. Okay, and so for example, this one we just have a nav bar, and if we remember, if we go back to this this AWS sandbox, this is a very, very simple environment, right? Where we just had some instructional material here. Okay, if I wanted to, I can enable a console. We'll save it. Okay, and then when we switch over to the learner and reload, now you'll see that we have the instructional material on the left-hand side, and now we've got an AWS console, or a terminal over here, so we can again, issue CLI calls if I need to. Okay. We have different button controls. We can say, okay, we can hide the stop lab, for example, just to simplify things for the learner. We also have like source and file browser, so we could, if I enable those, I should have enabled those earlier. So if I enable these, then you actually have a file system for the learner as well. Reload it. So I've got a file system here, a student work area, and a file editor. So let's see, is there anything interesting here to edit? Not really. Oh, I guess I can take a look at credentials, for example. So these are the AWS credentials that were planted inside this work area. Okay, and then there's information that we can provide to the learners. The timer, we can enable disabled timers, enable disable the remaining budget, that sort of thing. Okay. In addition to that, inside the teacher work area, we can set up the assignment instructions, right? And so inside the assignment library, there is a public docs directory, and this is the README file. Okay, and so this could be a markdown file, it could be HTML, it could be PDF, it could just be plain text. Kind of depends on what you need. And so you can see, this is the instructional material that we provided to the student. At the same time, inside ASN Lib, we also have a policy file. And so this tells you what the student is allowed to do, what the guardrails are for this specific lab. Okay, and so here they're allowed to use DynamoDB and EC2, but then you also see that there's some restrictions for DynamoDB. You can do reserve DynamoDB. We can restrict the instance types that the learners have access to. We can restrict the AMIs that the learners have access to. So there's a lot that we can do to kind of protect the environment, right, such that learners aren't kind of exceeding the bounds of the instructions and exceeding the costs that are allocated. Okay, if we go and take a look at this evaluate an AWS environment, and remember this is the one where we had an AWS environment that has preloaded some content, and you're supposed to answer the questions on the right-hand side. In the teacher side, this is configured in a certain way. This is using this is an MCQ, which is our multiple choice question format. And so we have, and we'll turn off the terminal down here. So we have our own format for setting up multiple choice questions. Okay, and so we could, as an instructor, and this is kind of an extended markup language, right? So this will specify, we've got a question asking about instance type, and then we've got some radio boxes here, and so the correct answer is X. And so what we have here are 4 questions that are configured, are specified by the instructor, and then we could do a generate quiz, which will generate the quiz into the README file for the students inside this ASNLib docs directory. Okay, and so when we take a look at this, this is the generated student work, right? And when we take a look at it, you'll see that again, you know, the radio boxes are rendered, the answers are not shown, but you know, when we do a submission, we'll actually do a comparison with the golden answers that are specified in this this markdown file. So the other lab that we showed, that was a challenge lab, and this is again a graded lab based on the student work inside the AWS environment. Okay, so the evaluation of the environment was really just a MCQ, you know, answering some questions that have pre-canned answers and had a pre-launched template. In this case, we have a grading script that will evaluate and actually run some commands to evaluate the environment. Okay, so for example, here we're doing an AWS S3 LS. So looking at the S3 bucket to see whether or not there's something named my web. Okay, we're also doing you know, a test of the URL to see whether it's open. Okay, and so those are the two main tests that are done for this this lab here. Right, first making sure that S3 bucket was created properly, and second that the permissions were open and it had some content in there. Okay, and so this is, you know, a second example of, you know, a evaluated environment. And then this last one, this is the Jupyter environment, and this is using MB Grader, which is a Jupyter grading format. So as an instructor, I can set up, you know, this lab to use AWS, and then also use a hidden graded auto-graded test here, asking for the results of the student work, right? And you know, kind of doing an assertion of the sentiments variable to check whether it's positive. So let's see, anything else I'm missing here? Oh, actually, I think inside this hackathon, you know, I informed you guys that we were preloading the environment with the COVID data sets, and so here we've got a policy file which specifies the bounds of, again, what the learner can do or the user can do, and then there's this lab template which will actually pre-launch resources into the Athena database. Okay, and so here we've got some data sets, and then this is using AWS Glue and pulling it into Athena. Okay, so I guess just to recap, we have a pretty sophisticated AWS and Azure cloud infrastructure lab environment that is protected by session timers, policies, budgets, and then it can also get pre-launched with certain resources. It's got various interfaces for the learner to access the environment, whether it's you know, through the cloud infrastructure's console, whether it's through a browser iframed in our platform. It could be through CLI, through a terminal, could be through some programming interfaces like Jupyter Notebook or Eclipse Thea, and then and then we can actually do team projects as well. I didn't get into that. Everything can be assessed so that once the learner has done the work, they can do a submission, and you can either submit it and assess them based on some multiple choice questions and answers, or you can actually go and inspect their environment as well. And then everything gets cleaned up after the session. There's there's nothing to worry about, right? Learners are given temporary access to the environment, and once the lab is done, then they're home free. There's no worries about a learner kind of leaving the lab running indefinitely, spinning up costs on their own credit cards. Everything is done inside Vocareum. So at this point, I'd like to stop and take any questions.